Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, the one thing that Mike Conley absolutely does better than D'Angelo Russell, and the biggest difference between D'Lo and Mike Conley that I think we'll see pretty quickly. I want to focus in on that, talk a little more about Conley's Jazz teams, break down what he'll bring to Minnesota in a little bit more depth here today. We'll also look at Wolves-Mavs Monday night and look at a couple takeaways from Wolves-Grizzlies on Friday. It's all coming on the show. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. Happy Monday, everybody. Happy Timberwolves game day. Hopefully you had a great weekend and enjoyed a fun Super Bowl Sunday as well. Of course, Wolves-Mavs tonight. We'll talk about that a little later in the show. Plenty to get to here. First, though, off the top, a big thank you, first of all, for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can find this show. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves. Don't forget the T, and also at Beecken, and that's with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, so Wolves-Grizzlies was Friday night. It was a bit of a debacle. Of course, Marnie Gellner from Bally Sports North and I talked about it on the postcast Friday night. This is the first episode since that game, so I do want to hit a couple things from that later. Really kind of in the context of the Wolves-Mavs game upcoming tonight on Monday. The Wolves had the full weekend off, Saturday, Sunday off. So we'll do that a little later, but I want to spend the first part of the show talking more about Mike Conley because the day of the trade, there was a Wolves game. So we covered the trade, we covered the game, and then led into the Wolves-Grizzlies game Friday night. It was kind of a whirlwind last couple of days of the week last week. So I spent a little bit more time looking at some numbers, also looking back at what Utah did with Mike Conley and how he was utilized, and really, I guess, more what their offense was like in Utah. And I talked a little bit about this late. It was probably Friday's show. It was late last week. And just kind of generally the sets that Quin Snyder, the former Jazz head coach, of course, what he did with Mike Conley with their offense overall. And I spent a little bit of time on Friday's show talking about the similarities between this Timberwolves team and that Jazz team. The biggest thing, of course, being literally Rudy Gobert and Mike Conley being two of the five starters, 40% of the starters. So that's the biggest thing. There's also some similarities between Donovan Mitchell, certainly early career Donovan Mitchell, and third-year Anthony Edwards, right? There's a lot of parallels to be drawn there. And then also having a kind of a 3-and-D type player in Royce O'Neal for the Jazz and Jaden McDaniels for the Wolves, similar in terms of their role. Now, I do think there's no question McDaniels has a higher ceiling and could do a bit more with the ball in his hands offensively than Royce O'Neal, but he hasn't really been asked to do that yet, right? So there's some construction there similar. And then, of course, the piece that isn't on the floor now is Karl-Anthony Towns, and Bojan Bogdanovic was fantastic for the Jazz and still is nearly a 20-point per game scorer, a dynamic shooter, fantastic from the corners, shooting threes from the corners. That was a big part of what he did in Utah and what the Jazz offense was all about. But Towns is a better player than Bojan Bogdanovic. Like the ceiling, or literally the ceiling, the floor, however you want to frame it. Towns is a better player than Bogdanovic, better all-around player. So the ceiling of this Timberwolves offense, of course, Rudy's older and Conley's older, is higher than I think what it was in Utah. And remember, they were the number one offense in the league last season. Just last season, the Utah Jazz had the number one offensive efficiency in the entire NBA in the regular season. And of course, they were beat rather handily in the first round as the higher seed by the Dallas Mavericks, coincidentally, who the Wolves play Monday night. All that to say, there's similarities between these teams. I think what we'll see the Wolves start to do, Chris Finch, he already ran a lot of these sets, but one of the things Quin Snyder did a bunch in Utah was he ran a lot of horn sets and then had different variations of these horn sets. And if you're not familiar, basically what that means is you have players at the elbows, right, at the corners of the free throw line, corners of the lane, and that's a horns a horn set, and then you run various things out of that. And there's all kinds of things you can do there, right? But it's a pretty standard setup for a lot of NBA offenses. But what Quin Snyder liked to do was he would sometimes put smalls, at least at one of the two spots on the elbows, instead of just simply putting bigs there. The more traditional original horn set a lot of times had bigs there. But Snyder would a lot of times put a ball handler there and run actions, getting the ball handler. It's like, for instance, Donovan Mitchell would stand at one elbow, and he'd pop out to the perimeter, get a handoff, and then curl around the other elbow where there's a screen being set, and you get another, you get either a pin down, or maybe it's double drag screens. If you're running this more out of transit, or I guess really more staggered screens, to try and get something moving to that opposite side of the floor, and then get Donovan Mitchell downhill. I could see Chris Finch doing this. He did a little bit with D'Lo at the elbows, but I could see him putting Conley at, or putting Anthony Edwards, I should say, at one elbow, and Conley brings the ball down the court. Conley dumps it to Edwards near the elbow, and then Conley runs to call it the left corner, right? And then Edwards dribbles around a screen at the right elbow, gets another down screen, or I guess it wouldn't be a down screen, but another screen coming around to the right side of the floor, and Conley loops around, pops into the opposite corner, and you've got Conley in the short corner. You've got Edwards handling the ball. Conley's your very good corner three-point shooter. He's there. And then, of course, this isn't even considering Towns, but if Gobert's setting that second screen, then he's rolling to the basket. So essentially, or slipping the screen. So then you have Gobert diving to the rim. You've got Edwards going downhill. You've got Conley in the short corner. And McDaniels, of course, is on the opposite end of the floor in this scenario. You've got enough offensive firepower there, enough options, those types of things, right? That's just one example. But how many different, like Edwards can do all of the above, right? He can do all of those things. And when Karl-Anthony Towns, like currently you've got Kyle Anderson when he's able to be on the floor with the back spasm still bothering him. He can play really any of those roles as well. Like he's obviously not a dynamic three-point shooter, although the percentage is very good this year. But he could be the one initiating, like I just suggested Conley might do, which is dump the ball in, run to the corner, cut baseline to the opposite corner. Maybe there is a pin down being set to pop into the corner, and one option is to get him the ball in that short corner for an open three. Kyle Anderson's actually been shooting the ball really well from the corners this season. Jaden McDaniels, same thing. Any of those guys could be the one to initiate that offense. But Conley gives you somebody where if that action's not there, or if you peel out of it, he can reset the offense and pick and roll. Even if Ant is going to be primarily the one driving this offense, Conley obviously still can do that. And a lot of what he did in Utah is just that. It was throw the ball to the elbow, stand in the corner, and then maybe you're running the secondary action if the first one's not there, or you're available for the driving kick. Conley can pump fake and then make the right second reaction read, right? He could pump fake the three drive and then kick to somebody else, or perhaps it's the floater game, it's the lob to Rudy on that secondary action, whatever that might be. But Conley's got that basketball IQ on both ends of the floor, really, but specifically here on offense, to be able to do all of those different things and not get yourself stuck, right? D'Lo's answer a lot of times was to find his own shot, which was okay, and it worked, to an extent. But if the initial action wasn't there, it just kind of devolved into, okay, well, I guess I'll shoot this contested jumper. And when he was on, it worked great. When he was off, it didn't. Or it was a bad turnover, right? Trying to force something that wasn't there. And Conley does not do that, which actually brings me to my next point. I spent some time at B-Ball Index, and which is a fantastic site. Lots of great metrics there. They actually have they have their own catch-all. They have the LeBron metric, if you've seen that anywhere. I think it's actually now part of the ESPN NBA trade machine. But they also kind of compile all these different catch-all metrics and give you basically like a cumulative ranking in that metric. They have a bunch of their own proprietary stuff as well, and it's great. So I have an interesting statistic to get to where Mike Conley laps D'Angelo Russell, and it's related to turnovers, not just straight turnovers, but quality of assist to turnover, I guess ratio, right? Like basically quality of passes, quality of creation of offensive playmaking, and where Mike Conley's much, much, much better than D'Angelo Russell, which not coincidentally is an area that the Wolves have struggled mightily with this season, and a primary reason why the Wolves obviously traded for Mike Conley. So I want to get to that here next. First, though, let's talk about our title sponsors of today's show, and that is our friends over at LinkedIn. As a small business owner or hiring manager, you know that success in 2023 all depends on the team members you surround yourself with, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. With LinkedIn Jobs, you can hire qualified candidates more efficiently by matching open roles with people who have the skills, values, and experiences to help you achieve your goals. LinkedIn Jobs helps you quickly attract qualified candidates to your open jobs with targeting tools. They go beyond resume data by using insights from your job post, company, and their 875 million member profiles to put your post in front of the most qualified candidates. Identify the most qualified candidates on LinkedIn Jobs and connect with them fast and for free. LinkedIn Jobs makes it easy to screen and rate applicants based on your job qualifications all on one platform. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. This 2023, we're almost 6 weeks in. It's time to find the right team member to help you achieve your goals this year. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right. This one area that D'Angelo Russell falls far short of Mike Conley, and the biggest area of impact that Conley can make immediately is in terms of passing efficiency. And I'll explain what that is. It's a stat over at B-Ball Index. The Timberwolves have been one of the league's worst teams in terms of turnovers all season. And, there's been some games where it's just been like really unsightly, right? In terms of turnover rate, the Timberwolves are 28th. That means there's only 2 teams worse than them when it comes to frequency of turning the ball over offensively. 13.9% is the Wolves' turnover rate. So passing efficiency, according to B-Ball Index, is passing efficiency looks at high value assists and bad pass turnover numbers, along with ball control percentage, to gauge which players are more efficient with their possessions and time to create scoring opportunities for teammates. So reframing that, basically ball control percentage, right? So the percentage of time that the player has the ball in their control, that they're initiating offense, I guess would be an easier way to say that. And then high value assists. So high quality assists that are leading to high quality scoring opportunities compared to bad pass turnovers. So not travels, not, other types of turnovers, but bad pass turnovers. Check out the comparison between D'Angelo Russell and Mike Conley. In fact, I went back 3 years to kind of underscore that this is not fluky. We'll start with this year, which is, of course, not a full season, but we're almost about two-thirds of the way through the schedule, actually, believe it or not. Mike Conley this season, passing efficiency is a plus 0.7, which is 96th percentile. That's graded out as an A+ at B-Ball Index among all players. D'Angelo Russell is a minus 0.83. That's 5th percentile. And, of course, grades out as an F. The value that negative 0.83 versus the plus 0.7. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a Z-score. Long story short, the percentile is what matters more. So 96th percentile for Mike Conley, that's an A+. 5th percentile this season in passing efficiency for D'Angelo Russell, that's an F. Last season, of course, Conley in Utah, D'Lo in Minnesota. Passing efficiency, Mike Conley was a plus 0.35. That's 79th percentile or a B. No, not quite as good as this year. D'Angelo Russell was a minus 0.2. That's a 27th percentile and a D. So not quite as bad as this year. So the difference last year in a full season was a little bit less. And both players were relatively healthy. 2 years ago, the 2020-2021 season, which was the 72-game season that was shortened on the front end by COVID, passing efficiency, Mike Conley was 68th percentile, was a B. D'Lo was, again, same as this year, 5th percentile, was an F. So over the past 3 years, you've got Mike Conley with an A+ this season and 2 Bs each of the last 2 seasons in passing efficiency league-wide. D'Lo is an F this season, 5th percentile, a D last season, 27th percentile, and an F the year before, 5th percentile. So, put simply, among players that have the ball in their hands a lot, D'Lo had issues with bad passes and a failure to have high-value assists. Mike Conley, good passer, smart decisions, more high-value assists. That is basically what we've been trying. Fans of this trade, and I think the Timberwolves, if you listen to Chris Finch and Tim Conley, of course, the Wolves head coach and president of basketball operations, when they talk about this trade, this is what they're saying. If we had to boil it down to a number, it's somebody who can steer this offense in the right direction without making silly mistakes, which in turn, you're giving more opportunities. It's all about giving Anthony Edwards and eventually Karl-Anthony Towns more opportunities. And you're short-circuiting that, both the opportunities and the actual growth and development, by throwing the ball into the stands or, like whatever, jacking up a three-pointer at a bad moment in the game, an opportune moment in the game, as D'Lo was wont to do. But really, the bad turnovers, throwing a terrible lob pass that gets tipped and turned over, dribbling the ball off your foot, like those types of things. Mike Conley's not doing those things. He's running the offense. He's getting high-value assists. He's avoiding silly bad pass turnovers. And beyond the obvious benefit of, like, obviously turnovers are bad, it also gives you more opportunities to get the ball into Edwards' hands, to get the ball into Cat's hands, to get the ball into Rudy Gobert's hands, Jaden McDaniels' hands, versus not. And the other benefit to that is those players continue to develop and get better, right? Mike Conley is going to augment that goal instead of take away from it. And for all the things that D'Lo is really good at, and in some cases is even better than Mike Conley at, right? This is one area where it's not close. Like I ran through all these numbers, and some of the other playmaking numbers, most of them are actually Mike Conley's favor. Like for instance, points per possession as a ball handler. Mike Conley's actually got a better points per possession as a ball handler each of the last 2 years. Not this season. It's close this year. Conley's 86th percentile as a ball handler in points per possession league-wide. D'Lo's actually 96th percentile this year. But remember, he's had an incredibly efficient shooting season. Last year, Conley was 95th percentile as a pick-and-roll ball handler in terms of points per possession. D'Lo was 92nd. So close. 2 years ago, D'Lo was only 81st percentile. Conley was 99th percentile. And I'll also remind you, this also matters a little bit. Who's screening for you? Who are your teammates? The last 2 years when Conley was an A+, each of the last 2 seasons as a pick-and-roll ball handler, according to B-Ball Index, he was an A+. Rudy Gobert was the primary big screening for him with Utah. This season, some combination of, obviously more recently Walker Kessler, but a combination of Jared Vanderbilt, some of these other guys who, like, it wasn't Rudy Gobert. Gobert's one of the best screeners in the league and an effective roller, one of the best rollers in the league as well. Clearly the Conley Gobert, and if you go back a year further, those numbers aren't as pretty in Utah because Conley was still trying to figure it out with Rudy Gobert. But the last 2 seasons, 2021-22 and 2021, Conley was an A+ pick-and-roll ball handler in terms of points per possession at B-Ball Index. And again, it's close with D'Lo, right? Some of the other numbers too, kind of the same thing. Passing creation volume, which at B-Ball Index, which measures passes leading to shots for teammates that a player makes per 75 possessions on the court. So a little bit less clear to explain in a synopsis, but that's another area that Conley has an edge. 98th percentile, D'Lo's 86th percentile. Last year it was close. 2 years ago, close. Like, most of these numbers are very close, but Conley has a slight edge. So I underscore the most important one, which is the passing efficiency, the avoidance of silly turnovers, the increase in high-value passes or passes that lead to high-value shots for teammates. It's what the Wolves were looking for when they acquired Mike Conley. It's exactly what they were trying to eradicate from this team are those silly mistakes that D'Lo made too often. And yes, Ant makes silly mistakes too, but Ant is 21 and also a really dynamic and efficient scorer overall. And the sky's the limit for his ceiling. You can't have the 2 guys initiating your offense that you're relying on every night. Both make all those silly mistakes. And now Conley and Kyle Anderson are going to initiate a lot of offense when Ant isn't initiating, and they're going to be setting things up for Anthony Edwards. So it's very, very clear why the Wolves made this move. And what I mentioned off the top of the show, some of these additional twists and creativity out of horn sets, I think we're going to see so much more of that. And we're going to see so much more dribble handoff action. Like, just have another primary ball handler on the floor that can knock down an open shot. Remember, going back to a point I made frequently last week, I probably mentioned it on, Thursday show, Friday show, all the extra shows I did Wednesday night after the trade, that Conley's actually a better catch and shoot 3-point shooter over the past 3 seasons than D'Angelo Russell. So you're adding that element, you're adding that other ball handler, you're adding the veteran presence offensively, the calm presence offensively and defensively. You're adding somebody that is just the passing efficiency, again, is through the roof compared to D'Angelo Russell. D'Angelo Russell, the last 3 seasons, I'll say it one more time, 2 Fs and a D in passing efficiency, man, at B-Ball Index. This season, Mike Conley is an A+ in passing efficiency. The last 2 years, a B in passing efficiency. Less silly turnovers, more passes leading to high-value shots by teammates. That is why Mike Conley is in a Timberwolves uniform and D'Angelo Russell is playing for the Los Angeles Lakers. Okay, let's close the show by revisiting a couple of quick things from Wolves-Grizzlies on Friday, and then we'll talk Wolves-Mavericks, and that game is tonight on Monday. So we'll get to all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drained. There's tons of fun NBA action this week, of course, leading into the All-Star break. But there's games. The Wolves play Monday, Thursday. There's, of course, games every night, as always, leading into All-Star weekend, which, by the way, that'll be a ton of fun at FanDuel as well. I mean, like, I always have a lot of fun, not as much the futures game because that's tough, but I guess we won't know the rosters of the All-Star game until Sunday anyway. But All-Star Saturday, last year I did well on Karl-Anthony Towns winning the three-point contest. I'll tell you that right now. I think he actually had the longest odds, and, of course, I put a little bit behind that. That went pretty well. By the way, though, FanDuel also lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right. Wolves haven't played since Friday. Wolves-Grizzlies was not actually a ton of fun. It's one of those games where it felt like it should have been. It felt like the Wolves should have had more juice. And Marnie and I talked about this in the live postcast on Friday, which, by the way, if you're not familiar, Marnie Gellner from Bally Sports North and I go live basically every game about 45 minutes after the game on the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. So go subscribe to that if you haven't already. And we discussed the game, do about a 15-minute postcast, and then I post that audio after the fact. In fact, if you're listening to this on an audio platform, the episode before this would have been Friday's postcast with Marnie and I. So go back and listen to that. We went obviously more in depth to the game than I'm going to right now. But we talked after that game about it didn't feel like the Wolves didn't have energy. Like it wasn't one of those games, which we saw a lot of in November, December earlier this year. It was really more... There just wasn't there wasn't a punch. The Wolves were actually up 1 after the first quarter, but the defense was lackadaisical, and you could kind of see it coming. Second quarter, they gave up 38 points, and it just felt like there'd be more post-trade deadline juice, right? Adding Mike Conley. Obviously, it was a road game, weird couple of days, some churn on the roster, new faces, waving Bryn Forbes. Who knows? But it just was not pretty. By halftime, the Wolves were down by 11, and the Grizzlies just kind of kept slowly extending that lead. The biggest issues in the game were points in the paint. The Wolves lost points in the paint 72-48. And that was, Rudy Gobert was okay. It wasn't necessarily his fault. There was a lot of point of attack defense issues once again for the Wolves. It was really more Ja Morant just getting downhill. And again, point of attack defense. It's Ja Morant. So, as Marnie and I said on Friday, Wolves perimeter defenders get some blame for this because you got to do better than what they did. But it's not like they let some random third string point guard, get to the paint and just dunk over them all game. It was Ja Morant doing Ja Morant things. And he actually only got to the line 6 times himself. He shot 23 times though. And, had 32, 9 and 9 in this game. So it's just a lot of Ja. The Wolves actually did an okay job early defending the 3-point line, but then eventually they got going. And also Ja Morant hit 3 threes, which if he's shooting the ball that well from the perimeter, you're in for a long night. So point of attack defense, which led to points of the paint issues. And I didn't, Gobert again played okay overall, but I mean, he deserves some blame for the 72 points in the paint for Memphis on Friday, because he didn't contest well enough. He got caught no man's land a couple of times where, like, hey, do I kind of feign like I'm going to block and then wait for the rebound, which is, kind of the Karl-Anthony Towns move. Frankly, like he's done that. He does that quite a bit, not as much anymore. But he kind of got caught in between too much. And that in part led to, or in part tied to, chicken or the egg, I guess, the -9 on the glass. Wolves were out rebounded by 9 in this game. And then also the free throw disparity. The Timberwolves only attempted 12 free throws on Friday's game. Memphis attempted 27. So in attempts, a 15-point differential, and makes a 10-point differential. Now they lost by 21. So do the math. Obviously, it's not why they lost, but it contributes to it. And Memphis actually committed only one less foul than Minnesota, because Memphis committed so many offensive fouls. In fact, the Grizzlies had one more turnover than Minnesota. They had like 4 or 5 moving screens in this game, a couple of charges. But the issues were defensively, the Wolves could not defend without fouling. And this is one of the few games where I would say, yeah, the officiating did not seem to be consistent enough. I'll say this and I'll leave it here, but Anthony Edwards played 39 minutes in this game, attempted 19 shots. 16 of them were 2-point shots. 16 2-point shots, not a single free throw attempt for Anthony Edwards on Friday in Memphis. Seemed a bit ridiculous. And I think Ant sometimes is, I've talked about this before, so I'll keep this brief. I won't go full soapbox on this, but I think he puts himself in a tough spot by complaining as much as he does, because now officials are less likely to give him, if they're on the fence, they're not going to blow that whistle, because they're tired of him complaining when he doesn't get fouled. So then he gets the short end of the stick when he does. And you cannot tell me he shot the ball 16 times. I meant to pull how many were actually in the paint, but I'd be willing to bet of the 16, probably 11 or 12 were in the paint. Like, he was in the paint a lot. It wasn't just mid-range jumpers. You can't tell me he shot 10 or 12 shots in the paint and didn't get fouled one time in this game. And that's almost not possible. So, anyway, it's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy for the Wolves and for Ant specifically. But anyway, points to the paint, free throw disparity, rebounding, those are the issues Friday. Ball control, or a ball contain, I should say, point of attack defense. Now, flipping the script to Monday after a couple of days off, the Timberwolves take on the somewhat new look Dallas Mavericks. Of course, Kyrie Irving, now a member of the Mavs, and he's played 3 games in a Mavericks uniform. He's only played 1 with Luka Doncic. They beat the Kings last week without Luka. Luka played in the second game against the Kings, and the Kings actually won that game in overtime against Dallas. So Kyrie and Luka are 0 for 1 in their Mavs career, which I guess probably isn't a good thing, because they'll be looking to change that on Monday against the Wolves. Games in Dallas, so it's a 7:30 Central tip in Dallas. And just looking at, I didn't get a chance to see the Mavs Kings game yet, but Doncic had 27, 9, and 5. Kyrie had 28, 7, and 7, and shot the ball well, hit 4 threes, 11 to 21 from the floor. They both played 41, 42 minutes in that overtime game, and the Kings ended up winning by 5. So we'll see what this new look Mavs team looks like for the season. Dallas has been very, very, very good offensively, and now they're adding Kyrie Irving to what they're doing offensively. So it's not going to get easier for the Wolves. They've been 7th in offensive rating, but they're number 1 in 3-point rate, and they're number 1 in free throw rate. So an analytic darling. Although their pace, they don't play with pace. They're 29th in pace, which is, of course, very different than how Minnesota likes to play. Not that they've always played fast. But side note, D'Angelo Russell, a lot of times, was part of the reason they played slower. He would slow things down. The Wolves are 4th in pace league-wide. The Mavericks are 29th. But the Mavericks are 1st in 3-point rate. They're 1st in free throw rate. And the Wolves continue to struggle when it comes to defending without fouling. The Wolves are 22nd in opponent free throw rate. They're 27th in fouls per game. So what Minnesota needs to do is do their best to keep the Mavs off the free throw line, which is tough to do because, again, number 1 in free throw rate. The Wolves have done a much better job of late defending the 3-point line. That wasn't true against the Grizzlies Friday. But I think they've done a better job lately. I think Conley will help in that regard. I think he'll be better than D'Lo, less likely to get lost or on screens, etc. I know one-on-one, you could argue D'Lo's just as good as Conley at this point. I think Conley's got, lost a little bit of a step. But positioning will be better. The effort will be better. I think he'll contest better on the perimeter. All that to say, contesting threes, defending without fouling are the most important things. Dallas is not offensive rebound. They're actually last in offensive rebound rate. So the Wolves' defensive rebounding struggles, which continue, are perhaps less important in this game. Not actually less important, but less obvious, right? The issues will be less obvious because Dallas is not looking to crash the glass, doesn't have strong offensive rebounders on the roster. So that's not something to be too worried about. So defend without fouling, defend the 3-point line as much as possible, contest, and figure out a way to guard Luka and Kyrie without fouling. It's not going to be easy to do, but they have to do it. Side note, this is interesting. Remember McKinley Wright, the fourth he's from Minnesota. He went to Brooklyn. I'm going to forget. I always mix it up. Champlain Park, maybe? I don't know. He went somewhere on the north side of town for high school and then played college ball at University of Colorado. Was on a two-way deal with Minnesota last year. He's on I think a two-way deal with Dallas now. He actually started last week when Luka was hurt before the Kyrie deal was completely done, and has played a little bit for them this year. Played in 19 games, had that one start. They've also got Chris Silva, who played in a game last week. He played in one game for Minnesota last year. And they have another former Timberwolf too. And I'm blanking on who it is. And now I'm scanning their roster real quick. Shoot, who was it? There's a third player. I know there's a third player that played for them, that has played for them this season. AJ Lawson. AJ Lawson, of course, who's been on the Wolves a couple of different times this year, and only appeared, I think, in 1 or 2 games for the Wolves, is on the Mavs roster too. So 3 kind of like fringy Wolves players that each played like 10 or less games, I think, in a Timberwolves uniform, right? Silva played in the 1 and Lawson played in just a couple. Weird, but thought I would point that out. So Wolves-Mavs, 7:30 Monday. Of course, we'll go live with Marty 45 minutes or so after the game on Locked On Sports Minnesota. So be sure to check that out and subscribe to the Locked On Sports Minnesota YouTube channel. A big thank you for those of you that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms, and also on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app, which you can find on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. Of course, we'll be back Tuesday with the post-game podcast. We'll talk all about Wolves-Mavs on Monday. That'll be Tuesday's show. And then we're daily the rest of the week. The Wolves don't play again until Thursday night. We'll do the post-game podcast Friday, get you ready for All-Star Weekend, which now, by the way, I guess I didn't talk at all about Ant being an injury replacement, but at this point, you've heard that news. It's not breaking anymore. This was late news last week that Anthony Edwards will be a injury replacement at the All-Star game. So congrats to Ant. It gives us something to look forward to as Wolves fans for that weekend. A reminder, you can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and also at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Now, make your second listen the Game to Game NBA podcast. Every moment, every top performance, and every result. Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA. Available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.